and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome for the first time. My name is Cheryl, and today I'm here to bring you my top 10 favorite books of 2016. So this video is in no particular order except for number 1, and that's just honestly because I could not rank these books. I couldn't put one over another except for my number 1 book. So without further ado, let's get into it. And the first book I have to talk about is Illuminae by Jade Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. This is a YA sci-fi novel that is really unique because it is a multimedia format book. So there are video transcripts, there are pictures, there are records, etc. And that really tells the story of what happens. I really don't want to say too much about it because it is one of those books that I really do feel like it is better to go in blind. I really didn't know much about it before I went in, and I feel like that added to the story. I feel like if I had known the plot beforehand, I would have been like, eh. My one complaint about this book is that it's very, very similar in a lot of aspects to 2001: A Space Odyssey, but I like this one a lot more than that book, so take that with a grain of salt, I guess. This was just a really fast-paced, fun read, and I am ashamed to say I have not picked up the sequel, Gemina, or rather Companion, because it doesn't follow the same characters. But yes, I really hope to get to that book sometime in 2017. So if you like sci-fi, I would highly, highly recommend picking this book up. So the next book I want to talk about is The Wrath from the Dawn by Renee Ahdieh. This was inspired by 1001 Nights. Now I've not read that, so I really don't know how much it compares, whether it's very similar or if it just takes certain aspects from it. But I will say overall, I loved this book. It is part of a duology, the second being The Rose and the Dagger, and that came out this past year. And it was so beautiful. I really fell in love with the story. I fell in love with the setting. I definitely fell in love with the characters, especially the main character. She is witty, she is sarcastic, she is strong. So if you like fantasy and you haven't picked up this series yet, I would highly, highly recommend it, especially because it is a diverse read, and I know there is such a push for that here on BookTube for good reasons. We need diversity. So if you have not picked up this book yet, I would highly recommend it. The next one I'm going to talk about is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. I absolutely devoured this book when I picked it up. So this is a fantasy series that takes place in London, but what's unique about it is there's actually 4 Londons. There's Red London, which is a magical London, Grey London, which is the London we know, White London, which is basically slowly but surely being torn apart through war, and then there's Black London, and we don't talk about Black London, basically. It is a terrible, awful place. And so Kel is a traveler who is the only person that can travel in between the Londons, and yeah, basically the story launches from there. It is a fantastic fantasy series. V.E. Schwab has created these worlds with such detail that I can imagine I'm there in the different Londons. I can see the differences, and it's just really, really well written. The characters are very interesting. I would highly, highly recommend picking this book up if you like fantasy. It was so well written. I loved it so much. So the next book I'm going to talk about is one I actually don't have with me, and that is Scarlet by Marissa Meyer. And this is the second book in the Lunar Chronicles series. I'm not going to give too much of a synopsis because, like I said, it is the second book. So these books are fairy tale retellings, but they're told in a futuristic society. For example, the first one is Cinder, which is a retelling of Cinderella, and she is an android. And so Scarlet is a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood. I fell in love with this book. I read it pretty much all in a day, and I literally could not get enough of it. I devoured it. And so that is why this one's on my list as opposed to the first one. I just loved this one so much more than I liked the first book. I thought the writing improved, the world improved. I like Scarlet as a character. I really love her and Wolf together, and the rest of the series is phenomenal. There's 2 more books after Scarlet in the original series, and it's just phenomenal. If you have not picked up this book yet, and if you like fairy tale retellings, I would highly recommend it. So the next one I'm going to talk about is The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. I finally jumped on the hype train. I finally read this book, and it was really good. My only complaint was that I'm not used to paranormal, so it kind of confused me a little at first, but I can really see why it is so hyped and why it is so beloved here on BookTube. I absolutely loved the book. I devoured it, and that is the reason it's on my best books of 2016 list, because it was phenomenal. I really don't want to give too much away about the plot because, like a lot of these other books, I feel like if you go into it kind of blind, it is better. I really don't know too much about the plot before I went into it, and I found that was better. The next book I'm going to talk about is An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. I just recently read this book, and it was phenomenal. It is a YA fantasy series that follows 2 characters, and it takes place in basically an empire that was inspired by the Roman Empire. It really felt that way. It was a brutal society, and this book just kept me on the edge of my seat. I wanted to know what was going to happen next. This was another one that was super hyped here on BookTube, and I absolutely loved it. I devoured it. I wonder if I'm saying that I devour books so much because I'm really hungry and I can't think of another word to use. So the next book I have to talk about is Queen of Shadows by Sarah J. Maas. First off, can we just take a moment to appreciate this cover, because my god, it is gorgeous. But this is the 4th book in the Throne of Glass series. Because it's the 4th book, I obviously can't say anything because that will spoil everything. But basically, this book took me on a whirlwind. I really liked it more than Empire of Storms, which just came out this past year, and which I didn't expect. But this is the book that I really grew attached to these characters, and I really became invested in the story. I had enjoyed the previous books, but not to the degree I enjoyed this one. I read almost all of it in a day, honestly, because I just could not put it down. So it's definitely my favorite of the series, and it is definitely one of my favorites that I have read this year. So the next book I want to talk about is Larklight by Philip Reeves. This is basically a middle grade adventure novel that takes place in a steampunk Victorian era that's also futuristic, so a lot of it takes place in space. It was fun, it was diverse, it was adventurous. I literally could not put this down, and I just love these characters and this plot and the setting so much. It's a trilogy, I believe, so I definitely look forward to picking up the next book because I really just want to know what these characters get up to next. So the second to last book I want to talk about is another book I don't physically have with me, and that is the Welcome to Night Vale novel by Joseph Fink and Jeffrey Cranor. This book was interesting, it was odd, which is the only way I really know how to describe Welcome to Night Vale. I really can't say too much about the plot because I feel like that will give things away, but if you've listened to the original Welcome to Night Vale podcast, you would kind of know the weird quirkiness of it. But if not, basically, this book follows 2 characters as they get up to some adventures in Night Vale. Night Vale being a town where really strange stuff happens all the time, really weird stuff happens all the time, and everyone just kind of acts like it's normal. I know that was a really awful synopsis, but I do have a full review of this. I will link that down below, as well as any reviews for any of these books that I have. I will link down below if you are interested to hear more of my thoughts about it and a better synopsis than the one I've given today. But basically, I loved being back in the story. I loved the characters, and I listened to this one via audiobook, so I loved hearing Cecil narrate it. So it was definitely one of the best books I've listened to or read this year. And number 1, we are finally here. And this is another book that I do not physically own, unfortunately. I'm really hoping to pick this one up soon. And that is A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. Oh boy, this book. It is the second one in her Court of Thorns and Roses series, so I can't really give anything in the way of synopsis because I don't want to spoil the events of the first book or the events of the second book for you. But I read A Court of Thorns and Roses this past year as well, and it was alright. I can see why everyone loved it so much, but it was just average in a lot of ways. But A Court of Mist and Fury just, was 10,000 times better than the first one. I don't know why, but I just fell in love with it. I know I've said I've devoured books this entire video, but I literally could not put this one down. Like, my boyfriend is like, "Are you coming to bed?" And I was just like, "Shh, I'm reading." Like, it was phenomenal. I just absolutely fell in love with it. I cannot wait for the next one to come out next year. I think it's called A Court of Wings and Ruin. I believe that is the name. I am just so hyped for it. It is probably my most anticipated book next year. I'm not 100% sure. But I literally, this book just took me on an adventure. I remember everyone saying, like, "Hey, if you've given up on A Court of Thorns and Roses because it's just average, make sure to pick up the second book. It gets a lot better." And they were not wrong. Oh my god. That book, it put me in, like, the worst kind of book hangover where you can read other books, but they don't compare. Like, I was able to pick up other books pretty much the moment I finished that one, but, like, I would just find myself thinking about those characters. And I would find myself thinking about the world. And I would find myself going, "Oh my god, what's gonna happen next?" Like, I literally couldn't focus on the books I was picking up because I was just, like, invested in that story still. And I really thank Sarah J. Maas for giving us that book because I loved it so much. So anyway, that's my top 10 books of 2017. Let me know in the comments down below some of your favorite books from this year. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!